Edith, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Okay, so hi everybody. I'm so glad to see people interested in bylaws. When I was asked to do this, it occurred to me that with the large amount of changes that have been occurring in sisterhoods over the years in terms of leadership structure and everything else, that the question of bylaws comes up. And the first question I thought of is, do we really need them? Do we need them at all anymore? Or not? So we're going to kind of explore that question and start off with some definitions. And we are going to be asking you for your input, for your opinions. Shoshana will explain how that's going to be done, and we will leave room at the end just for general questions and discussion. So I'm going to share my screen. Hang on. I'm so proud of myself that I can do this.
COVID was good for something.
I know.
Perfect.
Okay. So just as I said, leadership structures have evolved, and I'm sure that most, if not all of you, your sisterhood might look different than they did, say, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And so we just want to talk about bylaws, what they are, what they do, and do we need them? Do we want them? And if so, what do we need to do to them to make them applicable to today's organization? So, and as I go through, please, if you have something you definitely need to say or ask, I guess you can raise your hand in the chat or something like that, or shout out.
Yeah, if you click on reactions,
Yep.
if you have an updated version, you should be able to raise your hand virtually, and then we can call on you. If you have a non-updated version, I believe participants allows you to raise your hand as well. If you can do it virtually,
just unmute yourself and speak out.
yeah, and start doing this, that works too.
Okay, so the first thing I did, of course, is I went to the internet, because we always do. And I have two sets of things on bylaws to show you. And underneath, I put the little internet address I got it from. So this is a very short definition that the bylaws are your organization's operating manual. They define the size of the board, how it's going to function, the roles and duties of directors and officers, rules and procedures for holding meetings, electing directors, and appointing officers. That's a really brief, very brief outline of what bylaws can be. Moving down is a more lengthy list. It will provide basic information about your organization and rules that govern your board of directors. Now, this site was talking about nonprofits specifically. So it says the law does not require nonprofits to include any specific provisions. You should address the following to give your board adequate guidance to run the organization. Now, every sisterhood that I know of, but it may not be so much anymore, was affiliated with their temple. That is the main nonprofit organization. That is the one we share their tax ID number, et cetera, et cetera. So some of those little regulations you don't need to really concern yourself about as a sisterhood. But there's a good list here, and we're going to go through this. And as we do, this is what I want you to think about. Each of these items or topics or areas, if you feel that this is an important piece of information for your sisterhood or any sisterhood to have, that it's important to have this written down, and it's important to keep the records of this information for your organization. And some of these will apply and some of them may not apply anymore. So Shoshana, do you want to do just like a yes, no thing, or?
Yeah, we can definitely do that. So under your reactions, which is the smiley face at the bottom of your screen, there's a yes and a no. If you don't have that, then you can put it in the chat, and this way we can see how everyone feels about each one. So you should be able to find that. Again, if you can't, It might be in participants based on the version of Zoom that you're working on, or you can just type yes or
Okay,
no in the
so
chat.
we're going to go through each one, and I'm going to ask you to kind of do a yes or no, or however you can do that. And Shoshana is going to let us know if there's like a majority of yeses or not. We don't need the actual number, but I'd like to get a feel for how the group feels about it. So the first one is the official name of your nonprofit. If you think this is, well, not profit, official name of your group, Sisterhood Women's Group. If you feel that this is an important item to have, just go to your thing. And Shoshana, you can tell me when we're ready to move on.
Well, I have a majority of yeses, so I feel it's yeses across the board on this one.
Okay, good. So what I'm going to do on the yes one, I am going to highlight it. Hang on. I can do that too.
Genius.
All right. The organization's principal address, the location where you're going to store your corporate records. Important, not important, doesn't really matter, not applicable.
Right now, we seem to be leaning toward no's, actually.
Okay.
There's
okay.
a mix, but there's a
All
few
right.
more no's than yeses, some yeses.
Okay,
Um,
yeah, so obviously it's not going to be 100% one way or the other. I just want to pull out those that we're pretty much in agreement that it's important. The organization's purpose, your mission statement, or why you exist.
Oh, this is a definite yes.
That's a definite yes. Okay. And here we go. An outline of the board structure. Minimum and maximum number of directors. That's what they're talking about. We don't want more than X number. We don't want less than X number. Is that important to our sisterhoods?
Seems to be a yes, but not as overwhelming as
Not as
some of the other
overwhelming.
ones.
Okay, so we're going to.
So maybe that gets maybe that gets a pink.
We're going to do
or
this a
blue.
different color because we are flexible. Okay. A list of your officers, such as the president, vice president, whatever officers you have, and a description of what their responsibilities are.
Definitely a yes.
That's a yes.
That's a biggie.
Mhm. Procedure for adding and removing boards. Qualifications to serve on the board.
Quite a few yeses.
Yeah, okay. Any term limits for board members?
Yes, term limits very popular in this group tonight.
All right. Your schedule for regular board meetings. So?
Kind of more leaning more toward no's on this one. So
Okay,
doesn't seem to be a biggie.
Details on giving notice of board meetings.
Again, leaning toward the no's on this one.
Okay, no, we got one blank. Okay. Whoops, so sorry. I didn't want to do that. Your rule on quorum requirement. How many board members must be present to make a decision? Yes, no?
Very much yes.
Very much
That's a biggie yes. Yep.
big yes. A list and description of board committees, the smaller groups within your organization.
Definitely getting quite a few no's on this one, so that's probably a no. There's one person who's interested,
Okay.
but for the most part, no.
That will end your fiscal year.
That would be a yes. It's important to
Okay.
have those start dates and end dates. So yes.
You know. Rules for amendments. How can you change the bylaws?
Yep, very much yes.
All right. Well, I lost myself just a moment. Do this again. Now, how you handle the dissolution of your of your group. When and how you can choose to close it. This struck me as very interesting, by the way, because our bylaws do not have anything like that in there. Anybody feel this is an important thing to have?
Yeah, we had quite a few yeses on that one. So maybe like middle. Yeah, I think people are interested, but no one wants to think about it. But I think they're interested in learning about it.
Okay, so this is the discussion. I'm curious, one other thing I'm going to ask, for those people who are in a sisterhood whose leadership structure is not strictly the president, vice president, first vice president, second vice president, etc. Anybody here from a sisterhood that is either a group leadership structure or shared positions or anything? Anybody?
Well, shared positions, what do you mean? Like if
I
it's
mean,
a
like you have more than
VP
one
of
president.
programming, can they be two?
Right. That's
Co
vice
whatever.
presidents, co-presidents, things like that.
Well, presidents, I know you meant, but what about the other things?
Yeah,
Like
well, my question is,
membership and
right, my question is just I want to get a factual feel for your own group, your own sisterhood. Does it have officers? Are you still operating in that mode where you have a president and you have vice presidents and a secretary?
yeah.
Okay. Because for those of us who have, shall I say, grown up in that type of a structured sisterhood,
Right.
these things, you go, well, yeah, sure, you got it. But the question really is, so this list, I put this out here because I thought it was a pretty good list. And let's say you don't have any bylaws. Let's say you're just forming a brand new sisterhood, women's group. Has no bylaws at all. You're going to sit down and you're going to write down. Or let's say you don't call it bylaws. You have a group of women that are gathered together and saying, we want to operate as a sisterhood, and we want to have meetings, and we want to do programming and fundraising and all of that. So the question is, what things do you have to define? Which are the positions that you feel are absolutely necessary in order to operate? So unmute yourself and just talk.
Oh, Edith Joanne posted that this year they have a leadership council. So we do have a couple different options.
Okay, that's good. So if we're pretty much in agreement on the things that are in yellow, right, that you need to have something, some document, official document that is going to say who you are, why you are, what is your structure. Now that structure may not be president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. It may be a leadership council. That's also a form of a structure. And the procedures, are these people elected? Are they appointed? Or is it just whoever volunteers first gets the job? Well, why are these things important? So the ones that we had in yellow, why do you think these are important? Let's pick, I think knowing the name and the purpose, I think is pretty self-explanatory. Okay. A list of your officers. Let's look at that. So who would like to just share with us? I'm gonna I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment. Whoops.
Edith, there's a mistake in your citation, or maybe the citation has changed, because I tried to find that NOLO list, and it's not .org, it's .com at the moment.
I'm so sorry. I'll fix that.
And if you do want to share your structure, if you could raise your hand and I'll spotlight you so we can all see your pretty plenum.
Right.
Edith, I have a question.
Yes.
It's Fran.
Yes.
Are you referencing a sisterhood that belongs to, affiliated with a congregation? Or are you talking also about sisterhoods that are independent and not affiliated?
Okay.
Congregation.
The only difference that I can see is if you're not affiliated with a congregation, then you need to look at the state's regulations regarding a nonprofit organization. Other than that, the bylaws should make a difference. But in terms of registering yourself as a nonprofit organization for tax purposes and stuff like that is worth looking into. Those sisterhoods that are affiliated with a temple, we're an auxiliary of that temple. So we share we're under their umbrella, if you will, as that legal nonprofit entity. But if you're just on your own, I would check into that. I'm not a lawyer, believe it or not, and so I can't answer that. But it would be a good idea to take a look at it. If you want to ignore it, that's your prerogative.
Well, let me just add, if a sisterhood doesn't want to become, it wants to be somewhat independent, and they just want to be a social organization, that's fine. They don't have to worry about state laws or anything. But if a sister, I belong to two sisterhoods. One is independent. We are totally independent. We have a 501c3 and everything else that goes along with it.
Okay.
Okay, so there's two ways to do it, two ways to classify
Of
it.
course.
We also belong to WRJ.
Yes.
So, which you can do either way, but you have to have a purpose. If you want all the tax, want to follow all the tax laws and regulations.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So if we look at this list again a little bit, and you see, especially the ones in yellow, and we all pretty much feel that this type of thing is important to write down and to be agreed upon by your membership, that's what bylaws are. That's exactly what bylaws are. That's the term for it. So I think when some people think in terms of, well, bylaws is an old-fashioned thing and we really don't need it, you probably still need what bylaws do for you. So you don't have to structure those bylaws the way bylaws have been structured necessarily, but some items you probably do want to have in that document. Now, the outline of board structure, this first blue one, it kind of depends on who you are, how big you are, what your structure is like. And remember, in bylaws, you don't want to fill it with too many things, just the real important stuff, because you want to be flexible in your organization. So if you have officers, yes, you probably want to list those officers. What do you do? So the person who has the leadership council, how do you work that out?
Joanne, are you okay if I spotlight you?
Yeah, that's fine. What was I'm sorry, the question?
Okay, so I understand your sisterhood operates with a leadership council. Is that what you said?
Well, yeah, we didn't have anyone who was able or willing to be president this year.
Right.
So we're going to try out a leadership council.
Excellent. And so when you're doing that, how are you approaching that?
We haven't had our first meeting yet with the new board, but I'm thinking that we'll just each do our, we'll split up the responsibilities among the board members and
Right, okay. Now, your sisterhood has bylaws, I'm assuming,
yes.
correct? Okay.
Yes, that we're redoing.
No. I mean, listen, nobody's gonna come knock on your door. The bylaws police will not come and arrest you.
No, but we have to redo them
The
more.
bylaws jail.
Council.
However, I feel that it's important to be within your bylaws parameters, which means you need to change those bylaws.
Right, that's the plan,
What
yes.
your organization is doing and how you word things and whatever to make it possible to operate the way you want to operate
Right.
now. And also can leave it open to changing again to a more structured setup if and when you guys decide you want to do that. And a little bit later, I have some sample wording that you can use. And obviously you can think of, I'm sure you can think of all kinds of ways to do it yourself. So a list of your officers. Okay, president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. What do you think are the bare minimum officers that are needed in a sisterhood? Like, who do you absolutely have to have as an officer in your sisterhood? Fran, did you raise your hand? You're muted.
Yes, I did. You absolutely have to have a president, a secretary, and a treasurer.
Okay. Well, you absolutely have to have a treasurer for sure, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to have somebody who's dealing with the money. Okay. The presidency, again, can be a shared position, more than one woman doing it, or if you have a leadership council, within that leadership council, you're going to look at what is the president responsible for and who's going to take on one or more of those responsibilities. And so that's what a council usually does, right? And a secretary, you need to have minutes. You need to have a recording of the meetings, what was decided, what the discussion was, because believe me, something's going to come up and they're going to say, well, what did we decide 3 months ago on this? And you want to have those records on hand so you can refer back to them. Okay. I wanted to talk about vice presidents for just a moment. So for those of you who still have vice presidents in your sisterhood, what role do they play?
You can raise your hand or let me
Raise
know
your
to
hand.
spotlight you. Okay, Joanne wrote stand in for the president in the chat. And you can also put your thoughts in the chat if you don't wish to speak. That's totally fine.
Okay, Sherry's raising her hand.
So Edith, your question was about the function of vice presidents?
Yes.
Okay, one would be creating a leadership ladder for those people to be moving up and
Okay.
training.
Okay. Anybody else? What do your vice presidents do? Nobody? Okay, in my sisterhood, we have, our structure is a membership vice president, a programming vice president, a ways and means vice president.
That's what I was trying to say.
Right, okay. And in our bylaws, it states if the president can't be president, then the vice president of, I'm not going to remember, I think it's programming, moves up into that spot. Okay. What's some of the drawbacks to that structure? Anybody? Have you found some issues about that structure that might come into question?
This is Barbara. I think when you have a position that the person is filling to do a job like membership, then they might not be the best person to be president. They might just be the best person to be membership. And if they read the bylaws and know that they're next in line, they might be reluctant to take the membership job.
There you go. So how many sisterhoods have a little bit of difficulty in finding people to come onto their board and take on these leadership positions? Does anybody else have as much difficulty as my sisterhood?
Yes.
Yes.
Lots of hands up. Okay, so you've got to ask yourself kind of why. Now, back in the day, my sisterhood used to have about 100 members. Now we have 50. The way we operate, even though we have official vice presidents, is very different. Those vice presidents really act as chair people. They really act as the membership committee or the programming committee or the Ways and Means committee. And the concept that it's the leadership ladder and that one vice president moves up and then eventually one of those is going to be president, I'm not sure if that is as workable today as it used to be in the past. Any comments on that?
Sherry has her hand up, Edith.
Okay,
I don't think it's absolutely imperative that one of those vice presidents becomes the next president.
It's only
Sure,
if the
that's
president-
great.
yeah, it's only if the president cannot serve is what that is. Not that she becomes the next president.
Oh, okay.
It's just
Because,
usually in bylaws, it says if the president can't finish her term for whatever reason, this particular vice president is going to move into that spot.
Well, but I agree with Barbara. If you say this particular vice president, maybe she's not the best. Maybe a different vice president would be better. I don't think you should specify, who, unless you know that person is qualified.
Right. So how many people's bylaws? I'm sure you all read your sister's bylaws before coming on this meeting, right?
Yep.
How many sisters? How many? I know. But if you remember, if you didn't read them, how many sisterhood bylaws have that provision that says if the president is unable to perform her duties, and needs to resign, the ex-vice president will move into that position.
We have a slightly different version of that because we have a first vice president,
Right.
and it's understood
Right.
that position is the person who,
Right. But for those who don't have a first vice president, does
Right.
anybody else's bylaws have that specification? Do you know? I mean, do you know that they don't, or absolutely they don't?
We did, when we had a leadership council, we actually we didn't have a first vice president, we didn't have a president. And there was an understanding that the vice presidents would rotate for 2 months to be leaders. And they went into it with that. We had it ranked based on our bylaws. So they knew that which one would go first and which one would go next, giving every group of VPs a chance to lead. And with the understanding that they weren't on deck for the whole year, but that was part of the transition for that year. And we actually
That's
got an
right.
exec VP
Right.
after that and a president. But it was in order based on our bylaws. And Ellen Bick
Right.
has her hand up.
Okay, yeah, so I thought this whole discussion was super good. A while back, we used to have exactly what you're saying, vice president of membership, a fundraiser, And then it seemed that it was difficult to bring in new leaders because they were intimidated by the words vice president, which is a little ridiculous. So anyway, we took off the words vice president, and then we just had like membership chair, fundraising chair, program chair, and membership chair. And then it seemed like an obstacle was taken down. We still do now have a first VP. It's not called first, it's just called a vice president. And yeah, and so I don't know, it seems to be working okay.
Right. Okay, so I guess one question of our talk is, are bylaws obsolete? And I would propose that no, they are not. What could be obsolete are the particular bylaws of your sisterhood, if they have not been examined, re-examined, and perhaps amended to meet more modern circumstances. So hopefully we can all agree that your organization needs some kind of document that puts forth your structure, whatever that structure is, if it's a leadership council, if it's whatever it is, but having I would call them officer positions in terms of president, because if you think of that officer position, then that implies it can be shared by more than one person. It can be divvied up through the year as if that works out for you. And during that time period, that person takes on those responsibilities of president. So to itemize what the responsibility of president is also probably a good thing to have in your bylaws. Okay, let's talk about term limits.
Oh, Sherry has a question, Edith.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to say, back in the day, there was a sisterhood who had a triumvirate for presidency, but they didn't work together as three. Each one took a third of the year.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. You want your bylaws to reflect the flexibility that you feel you need for your organization.
Mhm.
But when you had the triumvirate, whichever person was taking on the presidency for those 4 months, their duties were what the president's duties are,
Right,
right?
absolutely.
And you want that to be set out in
Mhm.
your bylaws, so nobody can say, oh, I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. Or
Oh, exactly.
you want to have those things, those type of things specified. Let's talk about quorum for a minute, because I have an interesting story to share. So quorum requirements. How many board members have to be present to make a decision? We have that highlighted in yellow, so most of you at least thought that was a good idea. Let's say you have a board of, let's see, let's say you have a board of 12 people. That's officers, chair people, what have you. You have 12 women on your board. What do you think your quorum should be? You want to, if you can put in the chat, I guess, with numbers. Out of 12 board members, what should the quorum be? I'm going to stop sharing for a moment.
He took the chat away.
If you guys can, you can all click the chat button at the bottom of your screen. We've got a few people who've answered. We have 2/3, 7, 7.
Okay. Okay.
7, 5.
So everybody feels that it, so one person is saying 5, so that's less than half. And the other people are like a little bit more than half, right? Okay. How many people have gone to a sisterhood board meeting when there's no quorum? You can raise your hand.
Say it again.
How many people have attended a sisterhood board meeting where there was no quorum?
Oh,
So
I
you
have.
can't vote or anything.
We all have. Everybody has.
Yeah, okay.
Stuff happens.
So when you set your quorum, and again, if you're going to look over your bylaws to just see if they need revision, pay attention to the quorum, because in my sisterhood, that quorum number was too high because it was set at a time we had more women. And so it wasn't making much sense. Now, if you do a quorum, you say at least 2/3 of the board, that covers you because however many people you have on the board, you need 2/3 of them, whatever that number happens. If you say that you need 5 people, oh, that's good, Karen. I see that. People call in by phone. Yeah, that's great. Of course, now we know we can Zoom. So, hey, may not have a problem at all. I visited the Sisterhood once. Well, they weren't affiliated or anything, but I went to speak to them and they were having a real problem. They weren't getting people out to their board meetings, so they weren't getting a quorum. But they couldn't change the bylaws to change the quorum because they didn't have a quorum to vote to send the bylaws to change the quorum. They were stuck, and it wasn't just on that issue. They couldn't vote on anything. It had gone like for enormous amount of time with actually nothing happening in that sisterhood because they couldn't get the quorum, and they couldn't change the bylaws to get the quorum because they couldn't vote to change anyway. Because in their sisterhood, it was the board that voted to change the bylaws, whereas in mine, it's the entire membership.
Ooh.
So if they
Edith,
had that,
Angela
Yeah.
has a question for you.
I'm sorry, I just raised my hand when she said to raise our hands.
oh, okay. So you can vote by proxy, Debbie, only if your bylaws say you can vote by proxy. So I'm just bringing that up to you because I just sat there completely flabbergasted they were just stuck in a rut because now if the bylaws had been able to be revised by a vote of the membership, then they could have, had a committee of 2 to revise it, send it out by email, but they couldn't even have an email vote because it wasn't in their bylaws. So they were just stuck. And the main thing was, how can we get enough people to walk in the door one day so that we can actually do something? So that's another thing to be thinking about. It's an interesting dilemma sometimes. So you want bylaws, you need bylaws. Yes, Karen.
So I have a question. We've been, as I've been talking recently so I'm also an area director. As I've been talking to some of my sisterhood presidents and even in our own sisterhood recently, and we're saying, okay, we're going to start to go back in person. And we haven't figured out if we'll be meeting in person yet and when that'll be starting. And everyone says, yes, of course, we'll go back hybrid. But then when you talk about how are you going to go back hybrid, that becomes a big question of how that's actually going to happen. I'm not really sure. So I know one temple we were talking to said they actually think they'll set up some rooms that will be set up with cameras where they'll do hybrid meetings because
my sisterhood had its first in-person board meeting and it was hybrid. And I could only attend by Zoom because of other things, but anyway. And so what they did was, I believe they had, I don't know how they set up the camera, probably on somebody's laptop or something, I'm imagining, right? And my only problem with that, it worked pretty well, but I couldn't hear everybody sitting at the table.
Oh, right.
So
they were at the temple or they were in somebody's house?
In our
Okay.
social hall. They were
In the
seated
social hall.
kind of far apart. And
Right.
one of the women has a relatively soft voice. And when she made a comment, we that were Zooming could not hear that comment. So it wasn't that bad because we let the president know and she reiterated what the person said. So it worked. I mean, it really did work, and we could have discuss what we needed to discuss. Okay, so Joan is asking, she's interested in hearing how many sisterhood board members everyone has on their board. Oh, okay. Are you talking about just board members, which includes chair people and everything, I'm assuming? Yes? Okay, so who would like to share how many people you have on your board? People? How many people are on your board? Do you know how many people are on your board?
And you can put it in the chat if you want to, or you
Put
can
it in
just,
chat. Yeah, put it in the chat. I think I have,
Edith, do you mean executive committee or do you mean general board?
I'm not sure. Joan, do you mean general
General-
board?
General board.
General board, okay. So let's see, we have. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think we've got about
25?
wow.
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 General board 30 members.
Those are giant boards.
Yeah. Yeah.
As long as you don't ask how many come to a meeting.
Well, I could see why you might never get a quorum with boards that are that large.
The quorum number's a lot smaller than what we were talking about.
Okay. I mean, we have like 9.
It depends also on who you consider a member of the board. Yeah, are your board members, in terms of committees, are the chairs of the committee? Or is it committee members, or are they just general board members with no specific duties?
Portfolio. Yeah.
Ad hoc.
And then you have to see how it works for you. Ellen?
So if we have a co-chair, let's say of membership, then only, which we do, then there's only one vote. So only, even if they're both present, there's only one vote for the
Really?
co-chairs.
That's
Why?
interesting.
Why?
Yeah, we
Why?
have that as
Because they're-
well, Ellen.
They're representing
Right.
membership. So because, okay, let's say fundraising, only one person, then it would, and they only have one vote because there's one person,
Mhm.
it would throw things off, I think.
Well,
Right.
yeah, but I always had the approach. And when I was president, the many times I was president of my sisterhood, I
Yeah.
would say to my board members, you're board members first. What your position is, what you are chairing, that's almost secondary.
Right.
You're a board member. As a board member, you have a vote. As a board member, you help guide this organization. I wanted them to feel responsibility for the organization because we would have someone who was in charge, let's say, of the Hanukkah fair. Hanukkah comes, it goes, the fair is over, and then we wouldn't see them.
Uh-huh.
And that's different if you just want to have like a committee chair or something. But if we wanted them as a board member, to me, that board member needs to have their own vote. And then whatever they are doing, whatever position they're holding is, that's what they're doing. But foremost, they are board members. But,
Edith,
again,
there's a question from Shoshana, not me, Shoshana. And Sherry, did you get your question answered?
And my question was old. It was just, I wanted to know if that's sisterhood survived that was, couldn't do anything.
I don't know. I lost contact with them, and of course with COVID and everything, who knows what happened. We're going to be recontacting them in the coming year, so I can report back.
Good. Okay.
And
Thanks.
Shoshana, did you have a question?
Yeah, I thought the reason why our sisterhood had, the reason why we had each position, membership and programming, has 2 people that share that position, that but I thought the reason why we did it, or at least what it was explained to me, was that it helped if one person could be there and then the other person couldn't, and then if we had to have,
Ah,
it helped the quorum numbers. That's what was my understanding, is that then that you didn't have to have, like, made it more flexible, basically, because I don't know what the exact number for our quorum is, but it's very it makes it more flexible than if you had to have each person there with the vote or whatever.
Well,
So that-
yeah, you're absolutely right. It does provide for that. But I would say that if you have co-chair people or co-vice presidents, that they're both encouraged to be there. Again, because part of this is leadership training. So if you come onto the board and you are going to be a co-membership chair, let's say, okay, so you're going to help with the membership campaign and everything. Well, when you attend the board meeting, you're going to learn all about every aspect of that sisterhood.
Yeah.
And the hope, of course, is that you get involved, you get excited, and you're going to move up into other positions and want to become active. So what you're saying is absolutely correct. It does allow for that, but I wouldn't say only one of you needs to attend. You know what I'm saying? It's the implication that decide which one is coming, and that's the person who's coming, rather than encouraging them both to be there and have their say. You know, I mean, one of them can present the report, you only two people speaking at the same time, but it's important to have them there, have them at the table.
Yeah, well, there's definitely, I mean, that definitely, it was for the both membership and programming are very work heavy positions, right?
Right.
So that's one of the reasons why we have two people now, my understanding, to help cover those positions and make sure that, but so yes, we definitely encourage them to be there, but there became issues. My understanding is that there became issues with the quorum because of how many people were supposed to have a vote. And several years ago, we actually had to write out a thing that said, this person has a vote and this person doesn't, because
wow.
it's too unwieldy. Because every committee person who wasn't a board member or whatever had a vote, and it just became too hard to manage. It was getting like a board that was like 30 people big, and it was way too big.
And that's a really good thing to bring up, is determining who's a board member or not. In other words, the chair people are the ones that are probably should be the board member. Their committee, they meet offline. They can meet whenever and do their committee work. And that chairperson is the one, or vice president, whatever, that comes to the board meeting and makes that report and votes on whatever. Because a board, you're right, a board can be very unwieldy. If you're going to have every single committee member of every committee be a board member, that's going to kind of gum up the works a little bit, I think. But again, that's the whole thing. It's the beauty of it. Every sisterhood's bylaws is going to reflect their organization, right? And how you want to operate. And if you feel that the way you're operating right now is not working for you, then you need to think about what needs to be done. That's not always easy to do by yourself, because the people in the room are not always the best ones to kind of see it in a non-personal kind of way. So if you're feeling something like that, that's when you call your district leadership and have someone come out there and talk to your board and just brainstorm ideas and what's working, what's not, what perhaps could be done, and then move on to what you need to do to change things. And your bylaws, depending on what your bylaws say, if they say every committee member is a board member and you're thinking that is not workable, I mean, my temple board, they just slashed the number of board members on our temple board just this past time. They did a big bylaws change. So that's the beauty of it. You can change it, but you want to have perspective and leave yourself open, make yourself a little flexible so that you can still be under your bylaws and still do things a little bit differently than perhaps you've done so far. There was a question that I don't see now, something about, Okay. what was
Oh,
Edith,
Yeah.
I just wanted to throw in also that what we are going to be having a bylaws committee meet for our sisterhood, which is the reason that, you know, some of us are on this call. And one thing I'm not sure that we've discussed tonight was to have in the bylaws, if you have to be a temple member to serve on your, to be a sisterhood member, and if you have to be a temple member to be a board member, a sisterhood board member.
Okay.
If that's the case, one way or the other, it probably should be in the bylaws, I would think.
Definitely it should, and I think that came under one of the questions that we had voted yes to, that how that speaks to who can serve on the board. And
Okay.
yeah, and part of that has to do with, do you allow non-temple members to be members of your sisterhood? And some
Right.
do and some don't. And for those who don't and want to, you have to check with your temple bylaws to see if you're able to make that change and if it's okay with them. And yes, you're absolutely right. It becomes very important. The same thing about term limits. So what is one of the greatest things about term limit?
New blood.
New blood. What else?
Not as intimidating. If you have somebody who knows it's only for a certain amount of time, then they're like, they can plan accordingly.
That's true. That's true. And also, if you have someone in a position that doesn't want to let go, but everybody thinks it's time she did let go, right? There's nothing personal to it. You're in this position, it says you can serve two-year terms or whatever it says, or you can serve 2 years or whatever, and you've got to get out of that position. Nobody is hating you or mad at you or anything. It's just what the bylaw says.
Yeah.
So it is that impersonal rule that is very much to the benefit of your organization, because it's not, trying to get somebody out. You don't have to worry about it. You've got term limits, and those people need to move aside and let new people in. It becomes problematic sometimes, especially in the role of president, when you don't have somebody who wants to step into that, but it tends to work out pretty well.
Edith?
Yeah.
On that topic, I have a question about the WRJ board, because I know that they have a requirement that you can't serve more than a certain period of time in a position. But they also have the requirement that you have to go off the board and then you can come back on.
I know.
Right, that's what I did.
Does that happen in sisterhoods, or is that just at the?
I've never heard of that in a sisterhood, personally, in my experience, that you have to leave the board, you have to leave the position. I mean, in my sisterhood, you have to leave that position, but a lot of times we have women moving into other positions. Sometimes they go off, but they're not made to go off the board. WRJ did that in order to get new blood on the board. But what we're seeing is a lot of old blood come back after a year off.
Right.
And you know what? They have a nominating committee, and that nominating committee makes its choice and makes its decision, and God bless them. And they deal with that.
Right.
Anything else that somebody wants to ask or discuss or bring up?
By the way, it was a great experience to be on that nominating committee.
I'm sure. I served on the executive nominating committee of WRJ, and that was most interesting.
Yeah.
But I haven't been
I'll
on.
bet.
Yeah. Nothing else? Come on, guys.
Joanne did
That's not
ask a
very
question
hard.
about checking accounts and bylaws, and it was earlier when we were talking about what you have to have on there. So Edith, is there any insights you have about accounting and
What
bylaws?
you have to have on the check.
I was saying when you were talking about whether you need like your location and stuff in the bylaws, I think for checking accounts that sometimes they require a copy of your bylaws. So some of that information
Yes,
I think you
you're
have.
right. Yeah, and you know, nowadays they're requiring much more than they used to.
Mhm.
That's true. And also in terms of who's going to be able to, whose names are going to be on that checking account. That should also be in your bylaws. It should not be just one person. You know, it should be at least I would say the president and the treasurer, not that both have to sign everything, but they need to both have access to that account. You know, there is one case that I know of personally many, many years ago where a sisterhood president absconded with sisterhood money. So we don't hear much about anything like that, thank goodness. But you really want to cover those things. Now, there are templates for bylaws and WRJ that you can get for Yammer in the files area. If you're really looking to see a good example, sample, and look it over, a lot of it may not apply to you, but you can get some ideas. Okay, Karen?
I know when we changed banks not too many years ago with our checking account, some of that is mandated by the bank. And it was very interesting. I thought it was very interesting. They required the secretary to be on the checking account. And they had their own, I mean, it was Chase Bank. It was a regular big bank, but I thought that was interesting. They didn't require the treasurer to be a signer, but they did require the secretary and not the president.
That is interesting.
Yeah,
Wow.
so they, so you may or may not, I mean, you may require two signers or whatever the denominations they sign in, but you may not want to lock in who you decide to sign because the bank may have other ideas, and then you may find yourself in a pickle.
And there are other things you could put in there. For instance, hopefully all your sisterhoods have a budget every year, and you can give the president discretion to go over budget by a certain percentage, or it needs a board vote or something like that. You know, you need to think about that. But obviously, you probably all, except for Fran, your new sisterhood, but most of them have bylaws, and you just need to look them over, appoint a committee and really look them over and see if they need adjusting. So I'm going to share my screen very briefly one more time, just a sec. Give you just some example. And again, you guys can all get this, so, you know, that you can have shared positions. Whoops. Wait a minute. Any officer. I don't know what this is saying. I think I mistyped this. But these are samples of things that came out of a bylaws. But I think this, I don't think this one, this is not saying what I thought it said. I'm gonna scratch that one. It makes no sense. But if you wanted to open it up for co-officers, you could just make that statement and that kind of covers it. The officer positions, again, if you want to expand that further and say, you know, if there is no elected president, her duties can be shared amongst the other officers, something like that. You know, make it so that you can fit into your bylaws easily. This was an example of specifying the vice presidents, the discussion that we were having before, where the first vice president is going to do this, second and third, And just the questions, we kind of covered this, if the duties are to be shared by a committee, do you need some provision for someone to step into the presidency if needed? So if you have just a general group steering committee or something like that, and you do have a president, but everybody else is just on an equal footing, you know, you're just going to share everything together. Do you want to have something where you know who would step into the president's place if need be, or is that even necessary? Or you just assume, you know, someone's going to step forward to do it? Or do you go back to your nominating committee that nominate people in the first place and you empower them to find the president's replacement? So these are just things to think about, and just, you know, bear in mind as you look through your bylaws and look at how you are operating, how you really operate, and see that you don't want to go so far from your bylaws that you're not really complying. One last thing I wanted to point out is the differences between bylaws and policies and procedures or standing rules. Anybody know that?
I don't know.
Anybody? Okay, your standing rule, well, Barbara knows.
I wonder why.
You can answer the question, Barbara.
What I learned from the bylaws committee chair, Edith Kaplan, when I was on the committee for the district bylaws, was that policies and procedures are much more detailed and nitty gritty, but can be changed more easily. So you don't want to put anything in the bylaws that is either too nitty gritty or could be subject to change in the near future. The bylaws are more broad and generic, and the policies and procedures talk about what you do on a day-to-day basis. And if you need to change them, it's not the end of the world. You can do it as a board instead of many cases, the whole membership having to vote on bylaws.
Right, usually standing rules are passed or amended by the board, and they have to do with a lot of times financial questions. Does anybody mind the piano in the background? I can tell my husband to stop playing.
Just wondering what it was.
It's my husband, he got onto the piano, he forgot I'm on a call. Anyway, so for instance, for standing rules, let's say you give a bar bat mitzvah gift to every bar bat mitzvah person. That could be in your standing rules. That's a policy thing. That can change, you don't know. Or limitations on how much money you're going to support your leadership to attend leadership conferences, for example, or a limit to how many people you are able to pay for the registration, and what priorities you want to give it. In other words, if you're in a sisterhood and you can't pay for 8 people to go to district convention, you might need to have a prioritization. Say, we can afford to send 3 people. The first person to go will be our president if she's able to, and someone, board member who's never been, and somebody else who's on the district board or WRJ. You decide that that's something that goes in standing rules. Yeah. And it's really important to have these things in writing so that, for instance, when there's a district convention on the horizon and you want to, first of all, budget for it, you have an idea of how much you might need to budget for it because you already know how many people you're going to send. Number 2, when it comes close and you've got 5 people who want to go and you can only afford to send 3, you have a written policy. And that policy is giving prioritization. So it's not, oh, they don't like me and they don't want to send me. It gives a structure to these decisions that have to be made. So you should have some form of standing rules as well as a companion, if you will, to your bylaws. Because these things come up and, you know, it can be pretty uncomfortable sometimes. Okay. Anything else? We're a little past our hour,
Are
so
you going to share those documents with the people who are on this call?
yeah, Shoshana, you can send it to them?
Yes, as long as you registered for this event, I've got your emails and I will be sending out what Edith discussed, as well as the recording of this, the link to the recording and the chat. So you can. check.
Fabulous.
Thank you. Great idea.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything to say?
Just, it was so good seeing some of you that I haven't seen in a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
Sherry.
Sherry, big kiss to you. Mwah.
Ah, thank you. Same to you.
Hi, Sherry.
This is the best part of any of these things, right?
Yeah,
Okay, so I guess we're done,
we're done.
I guess. Thank you.
Thank you so
Bravo.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.